"Uncle, please help me. I am locked in and so hungry." That desperate cry from my niece during a storm led me to a horrific truth. My own parents were imprisoning her to steal a fortune, turning their perfect white picket fence into a veil, hiding a cold-blooded crime. The rain in Chicago does not just fall, it attacks. It was nearly 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and the wind was howling against the glass of my office window, rattling the frames with a persistence that mirrored my own restlessness. I was buried under a mountain of logistics reports, the soft glow of my desk lamp, the only light in the room when my personal telephone began to vibrate. I glanced at the screen. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was 630 Naperville. My heart skipped a beat. That was the town where my parents lived, the town where my niece Chloe had been staying since my brother Blake vanished from our lives 3 years ago. I swiped the screen and pressed the device to my ear. For a moment there was nothing but the crackle of static and the distant rumble of thunder. Then a voice broke through. It was thin, fragile, and trembling so violently that I could almost feel the cold through the speaker. "Uncle Grant, please. I am locked in. I am so hungry. Please help me. Chloe." I stood up so fast my chair flipped backward, crashing against the hardwood floor. "Chloe, where are you? Where are your grandparents?" "They went out," she whispered, her voice dissolving into a ragged sob. "It is dark. The door will not open. Uncle Grant, my tummy hurts so bad." Then the line went dead. I redialed immediately. Nothing. I tried again, my pulse hammering in my throat like a trapped bird. I called my mother Evelyn and then my father Arthur. Both calls went straight to voicemail. The silence was deafening. I did not waste another second. I grabbed my heavy raincoat and my keys, racing out of the office and down to the parking garage. My Ford F-150 roared to life, the engine a low growl that promised speed. I pulled out into the deluge, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the sheets of water. Every red light felt like a personal insult. Every mile on Interstate 88 felt like an eternity. My mind was a storm of its own. Why would they leave an 8-year-old child alone in a dark house? What did she mean when she said she was locked in? By the time I pulled into the quiet, affluent cul-de-sac in Naperville, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. The Miller family home sat there, a picture of suburban perfection. The white picket fence glistened under the streetlights, and the lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. It was a mask of order. The house was dark. I ran to the front door and pounded on the wood, shouting for my parents, then for Chloe. No answer. I tried the handle. It was locked tight. I ran to the back of the property, my boots splashing through deep puddles. I found a small mudroom window that looked brittle with age. Without hesitation, I wrapped my arm in my raincoat and thrust my elbow through the glass. The sound of the shattering pane was swallowed by a crack of lightning. I reached inside, unlocked the latch, and hauled myself into the kitchen. The transition was jarring. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood candles and high-end vanilla. The granite countertops were spotless. It was a home that breathed wealth and comfort. But as I moved deeper into the hallway, the smell changed. The fragrance of the front rooms faded, replaced by a faint, sickly scent of mildew and stagnant air. I followed the sound of a soft, rhythmic thumping. It was coming from the very end of the hallway, past the laundry room, a small storage closet that we used to keep old coats in when I was a child. I reached the door and saw it. A heavy iron latch had been installed on the outside of the wooden frame, a hardware store addition that did not belong in a house this beautiful. The wood around the latch was covered in deep, jagged scratches, as if someone had been clawing at it for months. My blood turned to ice. I threw the latch open and swung the door wide. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness of the tiny, windowless room. The floor was bare concrete. In the corner, huddled on a thin, stained blanket that was not much thicker than a sheet of paper, sat Chloe. She was clutching a ragged stuffed bear to her chest, her eyes wide and sunken into a face that was far too pale. Beside her, on the floor, sat a chipped plastic bowl. It was empty, save for the dried, salty residue of instant noodles. The air in the room was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the heated luxury just 20 feet away. "Chloe," I choked out, dropping to my knees. She did not move at first. She just stared at the light. Then, recognizing my voice, she let out a sound that tore my soul apart, a tiny, bird-like whimper. She collapsed into my arms, her body feeling impossibly light, as if she were made of nothing but glass and shadow. "I am sorry," she whispered into my neck. I tried to be quiet. I did not want to be bad. I held her tight. My teeth gritted so hard my jaw ached. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my telephone. With the flash reflecting off the cold concrete, I began to take photographs. I photographed the iron latch. I photographed the scratches on the door. I photographed the empty plastic bowl and the thin blanket. I photographed the hollow look in her eyes. I wrapped her in my raincoat, shielding her from the reality of that room. I carried her out through the kitchen, past the expensive appliances and the framed family portraits that were nothing but lies. As I stepped back out into the pouring rain and placed her into the safety of my truck, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Miller family legacy ended tonight. I was not just taking her away, I was starting a war. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and sterile white surfaces. Chloe looked impossibly small in the center of the high-rimmed hospital bed, her pale skin translucent against the bleached sheets. I stood in the corner, my wet raincoat draped over a plastic chair, watching as Dr. Sarah Vance reviewed the preliminary blood work. Dr. Vance was a woman of sharp intelligence and steady hands. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at the chart with a focused, clinical fury. She stepped toward me, her voice low but vibrating with authority. "The numbers are devastating, Grant," she said. "She is suffering from severe malnutrition. Her body is showing signs of long-term protein deficiency, but what is most concerning is her vitamin D levels. They are almost non-existent. This is not just a missed meal or a poor diet. This child has been kept away from the sun for months. Her bone density is already showing the effects. It is a miracle she has the strength to stand." Every word felt like a physical blow. I had known it was bad, but hearing a professional confirm that my own parents had systematically starved my niece and deprived her of light made the room spin. I signed the paperwork for her admission and waited until she drifted into a fragile, medicated sleep. I knew I could not stop here. I needed more than just a medical report. I needed the motive. I drove back to Naperville, the rain now a steady, mocking drizzle. I used the key I still had from my college days to enter through the front door. The house was still silent. Arthur and Evelyn had not yet returned from their night out. I moved directly to my father's study, a room of mahogany shelves and leather-bound books that smelled of success and lies. I began to dig. I started with the desk drawers, moving through files with a cold, calculated precision. I found a hidden folder labeled Household Expenses, tucked behind a stack of tax returns. Inside were the receipts. 1 week ago, while Chloe was locked in that airless room, Arthur and Evelyn had spent $1,200 on front-row tickets to a symphony at the Lyric Opera House. 3 days after that, there was a credit card slip for a $650 tasting menu at an upscale French restaurant downtown. I found receipts for high-end skincare silk scarves and a vintage bottle of scotch that cost more than a month of groceries. I took a photograph of every single one. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharpening. I knew they were receiving a monthly stipend of $1,800 from the state, and my brother's old accounts for Chloe's care. They were clearly spending that money on themselves while she withered away on 50-cent packets of instant noodles. But as I reached the bottom of the drawer, I found something that made the air leave my lungs. It was a quarterly statement for a trust fund established by Chloe's mother Faith. The total balance should have been $450,000, a safety net intended to pay for her education and her future. But the current balance showed less than $30,000. I pulled out the withdrawal history. Over the last 2 years, massive sums had been moved out of the trust and into an offshore investment account. I found a series of frantic emails from a broker to my father, warning him that his aggressive venture capital play had collapsed. Arthur had lost almost everything. Then the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with a terrifying click. They were not just cruel, they were desperate. They had stolen nearly $500,000 from their own granddaughter. They had hidden her away, kept her out of school, and deprived her of social contact because they could not afford for anyone to see her. If she saw a doctor, or if a teacher noticed her clothes were too small, people would start asking questions. Questions would lead to an investigation, and an investigation would reveal that the money was gone. Chloe was not just a child to them anymore. She was a liability. She was a witness to their financial ruin. They were keeping her locked in that room not just as punishment, but to make her disappear from the world while they maintained their facade of Naperville perfection. I looked at the framed photo on the desk, my parents smiling at a gala, looking like the pillars of the community. They had traded Chloe's health, her growth, and her very life to protect their reputation and their greed. I folded the trust fund statements and tucked them into my jacket. I had enough to prove neglect. Now I had enough to prove a crime. As I heard the garage door begin to rumble open, signaling their return, I did not hide. I stood in the center of the dark study, waiting. The war was no longer just about a room in the dark. It was about the $450,000 they had stolen from a child who had nothing left but her name. Jordan Pierce sat behind a desk that looked like a fortress of polished oak. The office was located in a high-rise overlooking the Chicago River, a place where the air felt thin and expensive. Jordan did not waste time with pleasantries. He laid out a series of digital logs, his finger tracing a line of code that looked like a foreign language to me. The emails sent to the trust fund managers were supposed to be from your brother, Blake. Jordan said, his voice as sharp as a razor. They were sent from a secure server in San Jose, or so it seemed. But we ran a metadata trace on the headers. The original packets originated from a residential IP address in Naperville. It is a match for your parents' home network. My stomach tightened. So they were impersonating him to authorize the withdrawals. Exactly, Jordan replied. It is wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. But we need a witness who can place them at the house during the times Chloe was neglected. We need to bridge the gap between the digital theft and the physical abuse. I knew exactly where to look. I took the license plate number I had received from the neighbor Linda Greer and tracked it through a contact in the Department of Licensing. The car belonged to a woman named Gloria Thorne. I found her in a small weathered cottage on the outskirts of the city, a place buried under overgrown lavender and weeping willow trees. When Gloria opened the door, she looked like a woman who had been carrying a heavy secret for far too long. Her eyes were clouded with a mixture of fear and relief when I told her who I was. We sat in her small kitchen, the air smelling of chamomile and old paper. I was Faith's best friend, Gloria whispered, her hands trembling as she held a teacup. When she passed away, I promised her I would watch over Chloe. But Arthur, he is a powerful man in that town. He caught me outside their house a year ago. I told him Chloe looked thin, that I heard her crying at night. He looked me in the eye and told me that if I ever stepped foot on his property again, he would use his connections to ruin me. He threatened me with a defamation lawsuit that would take my house. I was terrified, Grant. I am so sorry. You are the one who slipped her the phone, I said, reaching across the table to steady her hand. I had to, she said. I saw the house go dark for 3 days straight. I knew they were leaving her alone while they went to their galas. I could not live with myself if something happened to that little girl. Gloria stood up and walked to a wooden cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a small battered cardboard box and placed it on the table between us. There's something else you need to know, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something that will break your heart. She opened the box. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to Chloe, care of Gloria Thorne. They were postmarked from Las Vegas and Reno. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to my brother Blake. Blake did not abandon her, Gloria said. I felt the world tilt on its axis. What do you mean he has been gone for 3 years? We thought he just walked away. He thought he had no choice, Gloria explained, pulling out a letter. Arthur and Evelyn told him that the state was going to take Chloe away because of his struggles with addiction. They told him that if he stayed, he would go to prison and Chloe would end up in the foster system. They convinced him that the only way to save her was to leave her with them and disappear. She handed me a stack of cashier's checks. Each one was for $500 dated every single month for the last 3 years. He has been working in Nevada, sending me this money to give to Chloe because he thought your parents had blocked his access to her. But that is not the worst part, Grant. Gloria looked at me with tears in her eyes. I managed to speak to him on a burner phone 6 months ago. He was terrified. He asked me if Chloe was safe from you. Arthur told him that you had become violent, that you had stolen the family inheritance and were using Chloe to get to the trust fund. They told him that if he ever contacted you, you would use your influence to have him arrested. They built a wall of lies to keep you two apart. They made him believe his own brother was the monster, so he would never come home to see what they were doing to his daughter. I stared at the letters, the ink blurring as my vision clouded with fury. My parents had not just stolen money and starved a child. They had dismantled a family. They had weaponized our grief and used it to turn to brother against brother all to protect a hoard of stolen cash and a reputation built on sand. "Where is he, Gloria?" I asked, my voice vibrating with a cold, hard resolve. "He is in a sober living facility near Henderson," she said. "He thinks he is protecting her by staying away. He thinks you are the reason she is in danger." I stood up, clutching the box to my chest. The information trap was set, but the prey was far more dangerous than I had realized. Arthur and Evelyn had played a long game, but they had forgotten one thing. A lie only works as long as the truth is kept in the dark. I reached for my phone to call Jordan Pierce. We did not just have a case anymore. We had a rescue mission. The desert heat of Henderson, Nevada, was a physical weight, a staggering contrast to the bone-chilling rain I had left behind in Chicago. The air felt thin and tasted of dust and dry sage. I found the address Gloria Thorne had given me, a modest, sun-bleached stucco building on the edge of a quiet residential block. It was a sober living facility, a place built for people trying to stitch their shattered lives back together 1 hour at a time. I sat in my rented car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was a drum in my chest, echoing the rhythm of a decade of shared memories and 3 years of silence. I stepped out into the blinding light, clutching the box of letters and the folder of medical reports. I saw him before he saw me. Blake was sitting on a wooden bench under a sparse mesquite tree, staring at a small notebook. He looked older, far older than a man in his early 30s should look. His hair was peppered with gray at the temples, and his frame was lean, almost gaunt, though his posture lacked the slumped defeat I had expected. He looked like a man who had been forged in a furnace and was still cooling. I walked toward him, my shadow stretching across the hot pavement. He looked up, squinting against the sun. When his eyes met mine, the notebook slipped from his fingers. The color drained from his face, replaced by a raw, naked terror. He scrambled backward, his heels catching on the legs of the bench. "Grant, no. You are not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice cracked and hollow. "Arthur told me. He said you were looking for me. He said you wanted to finish what you started." "Blake, listen to me," I said, my voice steady, despite the roar of emotion in my ears. "Whatever our father told you is a lie, every single word of it." "He said you took everything," Blake shouted, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. "He said you were the one who forced Chloe into hiding. He said you were dangerous, Grant. He told me that if I came back, you would use my history to make sure I never saw the light of day." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply sat on the edge of the bench and opened the folder. I pulled out the photograph of the storage room in Naperville, the iron latch, the bare concrete, and the hollowed-out expression of his daughter. I handed it to him. "This is where Chloe was 3 days ago, Blake. This is the house of the people you trusted to protect her." Blake took the photo. I watched as his eyes scanned the image moving from the scratched wood of the door to the tiny, shivering girl on the stained blanket. The transition was agonizing to watch. First came the confusion, then the realization, and finally a soul-crushing wave of agony that seemed to break his very spine. He let out a strangled, guttering sound, a cry of a father who had realized he had been tricked into abandoning his child to a monster. They told me she was in private school. He choked out the photograph, trembling in his hand. They sent me emails. They sent me pictures of her at the park, smiling. They told me she was thriving because I was gone. Those emails were sent from their own kitchen Blake. Those pictures were years old. They used your guilt as a cage, and they used your daughter as a bank account. They have spent her entire trust fund. $450,000 is gone. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. It was the first time I had touched my brother in years. Through the fabric of his shirt, I felt the tremors racking his body. They played us both, I said softly. They turned me into a villain in your eyes, and they told me you had simply stopped caring. They built a wall of silence between us so they could feast on what Faith left behind for Chloe. We were the victims of a master class in manipulation. Blake looked up at me, his eyes streaming with tears that carved tracks through the dust on his face. The fog of 3 years of deception was lifting, replaced by a searing, incandescent clarity. The remorse was visible in the way he clutched his own chest, as if trying to hold his heart together. I gave up, he whispered. I believed them because I thought I was the one who was broken. I thought I was the poison. I stayed away because I loved her, Grant. I stayed away because I wanted her to have a life that did not include my shadows. The only poison in that house is Arthur and Evelyn, I replied. And the only way to save her is to stand together. I have filed for emergency custody, but I cannot do this alone. I need the father she thinks abandoned her to show her that he is still alive. Blake stood up. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, his jaw setting into a line of hard, cold steel. The broken man who had been cowering on the bench was gone. In his place stood a man who had just found his North Star. The strength of our brotherhood, a tether that had been frayed but never snapped, pulled tight. I have been sober for 18 months, Blake said, his voice dropping an octave. I have worked every day to be someone she could be proud of, even if I never saw her again. I will not let them destroy her. I do not care what they have on me. I do not care about the money. I am coming home. The awakening was complete. The ghost of the brother I had lost was gone, and the man I needed was standing in the light. Pack your things, I said. We have a hearing in 48 hours. It is time to show our parents what happens when the people they tried to destroy finally start talking to each other. The DuPage County Courthouse stood as a monument to order its stone pillars and heavy oak doors, designed to intimidate the guilty and reassure the innocent. Inside courtroom 402, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the hushed whispers of legal counsel. Arthur and Evelyn Miller sat at the respondents' table, a curated portrait of dignified sorrow. Evelyn wore a modest navy blue dress and a single strand of pearls, her eyes perpetually damp as she leaned toward her husband. Arthur sat rigid, his jaw set in a line of practiced stoicism. They looked like the victim's two grandparents who had tried their best to manage a broken family. Their attorney, a man named Sterling, argued with a smooth, practiced cadence that I was an impulsive, unstable relative attempting a hostile takeover of a child's life for purely financial motives. Jordan Pierce stood up. He did not match Sterling's theatrical energy. He simply let the facts descend upon the room like a cold front. He began with the digital evidence. He displayed the metadata logs that track the fraudulent emails back to the Miller residence. He then presented the forensic accounting report, a devastating paper trail showing the $420,000 drained from Chloe's trust fund to cover Arthur's failed venture capital investments. This was not a tragedy of circumstance, Jordan said, his voice resonating with an authoritative chill. This was a calculated liquidation of a child's future to pay for a grandfather's ego. Then he produced the centerpiece of our legal standing, the original notarized will of Chloe's mother, Faith. He read the clause aloud, the words echoing through the silent chamber. It clearly stated that if Blake were unable to serve as guardian, custody should pass directly to me. My parents had known about this document and had spent 3 years pretending it did not exist. The emotional climax of the morning occurred when the side door opened. Chloe entered, accompanied by a court-appointed guardian ad litem. She looked impossibly small in the high-ceilinged room, clutching her ragged stuffed bear as if it were a shield. She did not look at the judge, and she did not look at me. She walked to the center of the room and turned her gaze toward the table where her grandparents sat. The room held its breath. We expected her to speak of the dark room, the hunger, or the cold, but Chloe did not mention the physical cruelty. Instead, she looked at Evelyn and asked a question that exposed the true depth of their malice. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear, "why did you tell me that Uncle Grant hates me?" The judge leaned forward, his expression hardening into a mask of granite. Chloe continued, her eyes filling with tears. "You told me that if I ever called him, he would hurt me. You told me he did not want me because I was a burden and a mistake. Why did you say that he was the one who found me? He was the one who stayed." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 1,000 lies collapsing in a single moment. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, and Arthur stared at the mahogany table, unable to meet the eyes of the child he had tried to emotionally lobotomize. This was the ultimate betrayal, not just the theft of money or the deprivation of food, but the systematic attempt to erase the only person who could save her. Judge Marcus Hale did not wait for Sterling to attempt a rebuttal. He leafed through the medical reports from Dr. Vance and the financial statements from Jordan Pierce one last time. When he looked up, his eyes were burning with a righteous judicial fury. "In 20 years on this bench, I have seen many failures of the human heart," the judge began, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "But rarely have I seen such a sophisticated level of cruelty masked by such a pristine facade. You did not just neglect this child. You attempted to isolate her soul so that you could profit from her loss." The judge struck his gavel, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. "This court finds Robert Arthur Miller and Evelyn Miller unfit for any form of contact with the minor child. Effective immediately, all guardianship rights are terminated. Full legal and physical custody of Chloe Miller is awarded to Grant Miller. Furthermore, based on the evidence of identity theft, wire fraud, and criminal child endangerment, I am referring this matter to the state's attorney for immediate prosecution." He looked at the bailiffs standing by the door. "Take Mr. Miller into custody. He is a flight risk with access to offshore accounts. He will remain in holding until his formal arraignment." The clicking of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Arthur Miller, the man who valued his reputation above all else, was led out of the courtroom in front of a gallery of his peers. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, her pearls catching the light as she sobbed, not for the granddaughter she had harmed, but for the social death she was now experiencing. I walked to the front of the room and knelt beside Chloe. She did not hesitate this time. She threw her arms around my neck, her small body finally relaxing. The war was over. The truth had not just set her free, it had given her a home. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in DuPage County, effectively ending the reign of terror my parents had established in that house in Naperville. The Chicago spring has finally arrived, bringing with it a gentle, persistent warmth that feels like a benediction. The aggressive, biting winds of November have been replaced by a soft breeze that carries the scent of lake water and blooming lilacs. I stand on my back porch, clutching a warm mug of coffee, and watch the scene unfolding in the small rectangular yard of my city home. Chloe is there, her laughter ringing out a sound that is no longer fragile or bird-like, but robust and full of genuine mischief. She has gained nearly 15 pounds, and the translucent paleness of her skin has been replaced by a healthy, sun-kissed glow. My neighbor's son Leo had become her unofficial big brother, and she is currently locked in a fierce, albeit miniature, basketball game with Leo. She dribbles with a newfound confidence, her eyes bright and focused. seeing her jump for a layup, her ponytail whipping through the air. It is almost impossible to reconcile this vibrant child with the broken shadow I found huddled in a dark closet. Chloe is back in school now. Her teachers at the local elementary school tell me she is a voracious reader and a natural leader on the playground. She no longer asks for permission to eat, and she no longer flinches when a door closes too loudly. The nightmares have faded, replaced by the mundane, beautiful concerns of an 8-year-old girl. On the sidelines, sitting on a wooden bench under the budding branches of a young oak tree, is Blake. He looks better than he has in years. The gray at his temples remains, but the hollow desperation in his eyes has been extinguished. He is currently halfway through an intensive outpatient psychological program and attends support meetings every single night. Our arrangement is strict. He's allowed supervised visitation 3 times a week here at my home. He does not complain about the oversight. In fact, he welcomes it. He knows that trust is not something that is given. It is something that is built brick by brick through consistency and presence. We have begun the long process of recovering what was stolen. While much of the $450,000 was lost to Arthur's ego and bad investments, Jordan Pierce has successfully petitioned the court to liquidate my parents' luxury assets to replenish Chloe's trust. The house in Naperville is on the market, its white picket fence a symbol of a legacy that has finally been dismantled. My parents face a long road of legal reckoning, but they no longer occupy any space in our minds. As I watch Blake stand up to cheer for Chloe as she makes a basket, I am struck by a profound realization. This journey was never truly about a courtroom victory or a bank balance. It was about the reclamation of a human soul. Family is not defined by those with whom we share blood or a surname. Those can be the very people who leave us locked in the dark to protect their own vanity. True family is found in the people who will never leave you alone in the darkness. It is composed of those who are willing to break down doors, face uncomfortable truths, and stand as a shield when the rest of the world looks away. Responsibility, sacrifice, and the courage to act are the true markers of a parent and a protector. I put down my coffee and walk down the stairs to join them. Chloe sees me and runs over, wrapping her arms around my waist in a hug that is firm and certain. We are no longer a collection of broken pieces. We are a family forged not just by history but by the choice to protect one another. If you see signs of injustice, do not be silent. If you suspect a child is suffering behind a closed door or a perfect facade, do not look away. Your courage to speak up, your willingness to make that one phone call can be the light that saves a life. Do not underestimate the power of being the one who shows up. What are your thoughts on this story? Please leave your feedback in the comments. It truly helps me improve and create better content for you. Follow this channel for more powerful and meaningful stories. Your engagement means the world to me and helps these truths reach further. Thank you.